I used to take the late-night train home after my shifts at a 24-hour diner just outside the city. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and I liked the quiet of the nearly empty platform. One night, my shift ran late, and I ended up waiting for the last train at 2:17 a.m. I had checked the schedule. It was supposed to arrive on time, but it never did. I stood there, shifting from foot to foot, watching the glowing numbers on the overhead clock tick forward. 2:18, 2:19, 2:20. No train. I was alone, or so I thought. Then I noticed someone standing at the other end of the platform. A man dressed in old-fashioned clothes. A dark suit, slightly oversized, the kind you'd see in black and white movies. He was staring at the tracks, completely motionless. I didn't want to stare, so I looked down at my phone, but I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. Something was off about him. His posture, the way he stood too still. Then he turned his head, not in a normal way, too slow, too unnatural. And that's when I realized his face was blurry, like a smudged photograph. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. He was still staring. A deep sense of dread pooled in my stomach. I looked down the track, hoping, begging for the train's headlights to cut through the dark. Nothing. I turned back. The man was closer. I swear on my life, he hadn't moved. I never heard footsteps, but he was now only a few feet away from me. I took a step back, my breath hitching. My hands were ice cold. Then, finally, I heard it. The train horn in the distance. My body flooded with relief, but the second I turned toward the sound, he was gone. No footsteps, no sign of movement, just empty space. The train never came that night, and when I checked the schedule the next morning, there was no record of a 2:17 a.m. train. The last train had been at 1:45. I couldn't shake what I had seen. That following night, I searched online for anything about the station. Old news articles, urban legends, ghost stories. And then I found it. A grainy black and white photograph from 1948. A group of people standing on a crowded platform, waiting for a train. And there he was. The same man, same oversized suit, same posture, same blurred face. The caption below the photo sent a chill down my spine. Taken moments before the tragic accident at East Hollow Station, 1948. I dug deeper. Turns out, there had been a crash. A man was hit by a train that night, right where I'd been standing. Witnesses at the time claimed they couldn't describe his face. Every account said the same thing. It was like looking at a smudged photo, like his face had been wiped away. And then I found something worse. There were other accounts, people reporting seeing the same man standing on the platform late at night. Every single one of them waiting for a train that never came. I don't take the late night train anymore. I work as a railway attendant, mostly doing overnight shifts. It's boring, but I don't mind it. There's something calming about the stillness of a nearly deserted train station at night. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional hoot of an owl outside, and the quiet clatter of my boots on the platform as I do my rounds. The station I work at is small, one of those rural stops where the last scheduled train comes in at 11 p.m., and after that, there's nothing until morning. By midnight, the place feels dead. No passengers, no activity, just me the security cameras, and the distant sound of freight trains rumbling somewhere beyond the hills. Then, one night, something happened that I still can't explain. It was just after 2 a.m., and I was inside the ticket booth, sipping stale coffee, trying to stay awake, when I heard it. A train horn. I frowned. There wasn't supposed to be another train. I stepped outside, expecting to see the usual empty tracks stretching into the distance. Instead, I saw headlights. A train was pulling into the station, but there was no announcement, no update on my station log, no record of a scheduled arrival. I instinctively reached for my radio. Nothing, just static. The train rolled to a stop with a deep, metallic groan. Steam hissed from beneath its wheels, curling into the cold night air. The doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing the dimly lit interior. And then, she stepped out. A woman, dressed in white, not just any white, bright, unnatural white, like fresh snow under moonlight. Her clothes looked oddly out of time, a long, flowing dress that reminded me of something from an old photograph. But what struck me most was how she moved. Slow, deliberate, like she was walking through water. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me, ma'am?" She didn't respond, didn't even glance at me, just kept walking. I took a step forward, ready to ask again, but something stopped me. The train doors were still open. I turned to check inside. That's when I noticed. The train was empty. No passengers, no conductor, no crew. The seats were coated in dust. The overhead lights flickered erratically, buzzing faintly like an old failing bulb. The windows were smeared with grime, so thick you could barely see through them. And the smell, it smelled old, like mildew and rust, like something left behind for decades. I felt a wave of cold creep up my spine. My mouth had gone dry. I turned back toward the woman. She was almost at the exit. My heart pounded. Something about this felt wrong, like a scene playing out on an old, broken tape. I looked back at the train. My instincts screamed at me not to step inside, but I had to know. "Where did you come from?" I muttered under my breath. I reached forward, just enough for my fingers to graze the doorway, and the second I touched the threshold, the doors slammed shut. The sound was so sudden, so violent, that I stumbled back. Then the engine roared to life. I barely had time to react before the train lurched forward. Not the slow, steady pull of a normal departure. It was fast. Too fast. The wheels screeched against the tracks as it sped off, disappearing into the night within seconds. I stood there, frozen, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. And then I remembered. The woman. I spun around. She was gone. I checked the platform, the empty station, the waiting area. Nothing. A horrible thought struck me. I rushed inside, pulling up the security footage. I scrubbed back to 2:02 a.m., the moment the train arrived. The video feed showed the empty platform, the headlights appearing, the train stopping, the doors opening, and then nothing. No one got off. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. But I saw her. I know I did. I watched the video again, this time focusing on myself. And that's when the real horror set in. Because in the footage, I was talking. I was moving. My mouth was forming words, calling out to someone. But there was no one there. I shut the computer, clocked out early, I never saw that train again. But sometimes, when I'm outside on the platform, alone at night, I hear it, in the distance, that low, mournful whistle, calling something back to the station, something that shouldn't be there. I grew up in a town with an old railway tunnel just outside the main station. It hadn't been used in decades, too unsafe, too unstable, but it was still there, stretching like a black hole beneath the hills. Locals called it the Widow's Tunnel. The story goes that a man was hit by a train there in the 1950s. His wife came searching for him, calling his name, walking the length of the tunnel for hours. They never found his body, only his shadow, burned into the stone where he had been standing. It became an urban legend. If you walked through the tunnel at midnight, the widow would appear, searching for her husband. But if she saw you instead, you wouldn't make it out. Of course, as kids, we thought it was just a story. And one summer, we decided to prove it. It was the hottest night of the year, the kind where even at midnight, the air felt heavy. My friends and I, Mark, Danny, and Nate, hopped the rusted fence and made our way down the gravel path toward the tunnel. Standing at the entrance, it felt wrong, colder than it should have been, too quiet. "If we're doing this, we gotta walk the whole way through," Mark said. "No turning back." I nodded. I didn't want to be the one to chicken out. The tunnel swallowed us whole. Inside, the air was dense, pressing in on my ears. Every step echoed too loudly, like we were inside something that was breathing. Our phone flashlights barely cut through the darkness, making everything feel too big. We walked in a line, our footsteps crunching on loose stones. Then Nate stopped. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. We all went still. Silence. Then, from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, a footstep. Slow, deliberate. Then another. A heavy dragging sound. "Someone else is in here," Danny murmured. I turned my flashlight ahead, scanning the walls, and that's when I saw him. A man, standing perfectly still deep in the tunnel. He wasn't moving, just watching us. "Who the hell?" Mark started, but the words died in his throat. The light hit him full on, and we saw why he wasn't moving. He had no face, no features, no eyes, just a dark void where his face should have been. I felt my stomach lurch, my knees locked. Then, he moved, not like a person, like a glitch. 1 second he was far away, then snap. He was closer. We ran, bolted toward the entrance, feet slamming against the ground, breath burning in my chest. But no matter how fast we ran, it felt like the tunnel was stretching, like the exit was getting farther away. Behind us, I could hear that dragging sound, getting closer. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was right there. His arms were outstretched. Something whispered in my ear. Not words, just sound. Wrong. Twisted. Something trying to speak but failing. Then, I hit the ground. I didn't even realize I had fallen. My palms scraped against the stone. Blood filled my mouth. I looked up and saw his hand inches from my face. Nate grabbed me, yanked me to my feet. We tore out of the tunnel, sprinting until we collapsed onto the gravel outside, gasping for breath. Danny threw up. Mark was shaking so badly he couldn't speak. I turned back. The tunnel was empty, but on the wall, just past the entrance, a shadow, not ours. A man-shaped imprint burned into the stone, as if someone had been standing there for decades, waiting. Years later, I moved away. But the tunnel never left me. One night, I decided to look it up. I found an old newspaper article from 1953. A man died in that tunnel. They never recovered his body. His wife went looking for him. She never came back either. And the last line of the article. Local workers reported seeing a strange shadow in the tunnel for weeks after the accident. A figure with no discernible features, standing completely still, watching. I shut my laptop. I haven't been back since. But sometimes, when I see a dark hallway, I feel like he's still waiting for me.